Hello, book lovers and English learners. Welcome to our September live read along. I'm Lydie Bio and I'm an English teacher in France. I'm also the founder of Lydie's Book Club, in which I host live readings of adaptations of classics of literature and contemporary novels. I also tend to prioritize books that are written by women. So each month, we explore and read a different book for all levels of English. And at the end of each reading week, I meet the members of the book club in a live workshop via Zoom to discuss the chapters read over the week about the book that we are currently reading. And this month, we're finishing reading the B2 Upper Intermediate adaptation of Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, and this is the 2008 Penguin Readers edition. And if you want to know more about the novel and Daphne du Maurier's work, then I invite you to listen to the podcast episode 24, an introduction to Daphne du Maurier and Rebecca, which is available in this YouTube channel and also on the Spotify podcast, Read in English, Ladies Book Club podcast called Read in English. So today, this is our fifth live reading session, and we are going to read the last chapters. So we're going to read the chapters 9 and 10. And this Saturday, I will host the second live workshop session based on this book. So we will cover chapters 7 to 10. So if you want to attend this live session, you need to subscribe to the book club so that you'll be able to attend all the upcoming live workshops and also be part of this community and also have opportunity to attend upcoming events. I'm not saying more, but there are loads of amazing things that I'm planning to do, and hopefully you'll be able to make them happen. But in the meantime, if you want to improve your English, your speaking skills, your reading skills, and your listening as well, then being part of this book club is an opportunity for you to do that. And you can find all the information and upcoming dates of live readings and workshops on my website. You just click on the link below in this description. All my live readings are recorded, so all my Instagram live readings are recorded, so you're able to watch them here on YouTube and also on Spotify podcasts whenever you want, and for free as well. And finally, I'm pleased to announce that you can now purchase the workshop, the three-part live workshop based on Our Wives Under the Sea, which is our August live read along. We read this book in its original text, so you need to have a C1 level minimum to be able to appreciate this reading. You don't need to become a member to buy the workshop. So once you purchase the workshop, you'll be asked to create your login and you get a private access to the videos. And you just enjoy watching the videos in our conversation and learn one or two things along the way as well. So you can find the link in the description as well. Okay, so now I'm gonna start with a quick recap, as I usually do, of the last two chapters we read yesterday during our session. So we had a long reading session, and today it's going to be a long reading session as well. So be prepared. So chapter 9 is going to be quite well, Yeah, roughly, both of them are roughly 20 pages. So uh, this is going to be a long session. So I hope that you have your cup of tea now ready. So you can pause and come back later. Now you will be watching this on replay. So get yourself comfortable because this is going to be a long reading session. Um, so here, so we left off with, so in chapter 7, we um, learned in this long chapter the it was the this chapter is very much very pivotal in this story because it is the moment where we learn about this Mac's secret and the fact that he killed his wife. He reveals the narrator, so the young Mrs. De Winter, that it's him. It's in fact him who killed his wife. So he's telling us, well, he's telling his young wife the the origin of the well, or the circumstances of his decision to kill his wife. And we discover a very dark side of Rebecca that we didn't know before. She was very much put on a pedestal from all the people that Mrs. De Winter talked to, whether it was Mrs. Danvers or all the other servants, Frank Crawley, and also Beatrice. So she was praised by everyone. And now in this chapter, we learn that Rebecca didn't seem to be who she seemed to be. She doesn't seem to be the kind and the amazing woman that everyone thought she was, because in private with Max, she had another side of her personality, and she and him really didn't marry for love. This is a sort of an arranged marriage. And we clearly understand that it's like a deal. Rebecca married Max for the house, because we can see that this it's only Manderley that holds this marriage together. And Max marries Rebecca because she is a socialite, a socialite in a sense that she is the kind of woman that is able to host parties and make conversation and has a sort of a network that she can use, or that she that can help Max probably, or at least play the role of the house mistress of this grand, a luxurious house. So it was kind of an agreement, a contract, not a love contract or marriage, but more in the proper sense, business sense, of the term that um, they decided to marry. And we can clearly see that it didn't work really, because we learned that Rebecca cheated on her husband, on Max. She used to, they had an agreement that, and Max knew that when she would go to London, she had a place there where she would do whatever she want, or would meet whoever she want there. But as soon as she was at Manderley, Max didn't want her to bring anyone. And Rebecca, she broke that promise, or that agreement. And she didn't keep her word. And she, in a sense, betrayed Max with this arrangement. And she brought men at the cottage, the boat house, at this famous cottage. And also, we learned that she had an affair with Jack Favell, her cousin, and that she also had an affair with Giles, who is Beatrice's husband, so her brother-in-law. And also, she had an affair with Frank Crawley as well. So she really didn't have any boundaries, or uh, any limits, and pushed Max to the limits, and threatened him that when she would get pregnant, um, then the house would belong to, well, her son, or the child that she would bring to life, then would be, well, she's talking about a male, about a son, then he will inherit Manderley. And that made Max really upset, because he knew perfectly that this son, well, this presumed son, will not be his. And that put him in really, that got him really upset. And and he shot her. So this is how she really died. Um, but we learned that in chapter 7 that there is a ship that has came to the harbor, and um, which what's the name of the harbor? Well, Manderley's harbor, and got stuck. And in researching to find a way to get the boat out of the bay, they found out that there was a little boat deep in the water, and well, below or somewhere near the this big ship. And they found out that there was a body in this little ship, in this little boat. And we learn that in this boat, it is actually the body of Rebecca, contrary to this body that Max identified as Rebecca a year ago, a body of a woman that we found about 30 kilometers from, or 60 kilometers from the bay. And Max reveals that he lied and that he sort of um, manipulated the well, I think with Frank Crawley or whatever, whatever who he arranged this, um, they found a woman and a kind of a forgotten woman or an anonymous woman, and they used her body as Rebecca, and they kind of um, created this evidence of Rebecca's body. They made up the whole thing, and with probably Frank Crawley's help, they created false evidence, false proof of Rebecca's body. But now that the divers have found the boat where Rebecca was sunk, was what sunk with, now Max is desperate and believe that he's going to be found out and that he's going to go to prison because they are going to work out that that he lied, that that this woman wasn't, that he identified as Rebecca was not his wife. So they are going to question his um, they're going to question uh, his honesty and why he lied. Yeah. So this is what we learn, and how and this is what happens in the end during the trial. So Colonel Julian is sorry, is the judge that is leading the inquiry, and when Mr. James Tabb, who is the boat builder, reveals that the boat was in very good condition when he sold it to Rebecca, and the fact that there were holes. Also, this is a new information that we learned during the trial, is that well, during the inquiry, it's not really a trial, but it's an inquiry. We learned that there were holes in the boat, so that's new information here, and that raises other questions. What are those holes? So they realized that, so the judges and the police realized that she was murdered, actually, that the boat didn't sink, sorry, on its own or just with the wind, but someone actually locked her in the inside the boat, and um, and sunk it on purpose and and killed Rebecca. So at the end of chapter 8, the colonel asks Mr. De Winter, so Max, whether his relationship with his wife were in good terms. And Max de Winter is saved by the bell, well, sort of, as we would say, as yeah, as we could say, because at this exact moment, the young Mrs. de Winter, his second wife, is attending the inquiry, and she doesn't feel well at all, and she faints at this point. And Maxim does not answer the question, but instead says that his wife is not feeling well. As a way to avoid the question, obviously. Um, oh, she's about to faint. She doesn't feel well. So he does not answer the question, but try to put the focus on his wife. Right. So this being done now, I'm going to start reading chapter 9. So it's called Pavel Accuses Maxim. So let's see how the story ends. I was sitting in the little room again, the room like a waiting room at a station. The policeman was there, giving me a glass of water, and someone's hand was on my arm, Frank's hand. I sat quite still, the floor, the walls, Frank, and the policeman coming into place in front of me. I'm so sorry, I said. Such a stupid thing to do. It was so hot in that room. It gets very airless in there. It gets very airless in there, said the policeman. We've had ladies fainting in there before. Are you feeling better, Mrs. De Winter? Said Frank. Yes, yes, much better. I shall be all right now. Don't wait with me. I'm going to take you back to Manderley. No. Yes, Maxim has asked me to. I want to wait for him. Maxim may be a long time. Why did he say that? What did he mean? Why didn't he look at me? He took my arm and walked. Oh, sorry. Yes, so she's telling those questions she's asking these questions to herself. Why did he say that? What did he mean? Why didn't he look at me? He took my arm and walked with me down the steps into the streets. Maxim may be a long time. We did not speak. We drove away towards Manderley. Why will they be a long time? What are they do? What are they going to do? They may have to go over the facts again. They've had all the facts. There's nothing more. There's nothing more anyone can say. You never know. Tab's statement has changed everything. They may have to do it in a different way. Wait, what way? What do you mean? You heard what Tab said about the boat. They won't believe it was an accident now. It's all wrong, Frank. They shouldn't listen to Tab. How can he tell, after all these months, how holes were made in the boat? What are they trying to prove? I don't know. They go on questioning Maxim, making him lose his temper, making him say things he doesn't mean. They ask questions after question after question. Frank and Maxim won't be able to stand it. I know. Frank and Maxim won't be able to stand it. I know he won't stand it. Frank did not answer. He was driving very fast. That meant he was worried, very worried. That man was there, the man who came to Manderley to see Mrs. Danvers. You mean Fathel? Yes, I saw him. He was sitting there with Mrs. Danvers. I know. Why was he there? What right had he to go? What right had he to go? It was her cousin. It's not right that he and Mrs. Danvers should sit there listening. I don't trust them, Frank. No. They might do something, they might make trouble. They might do something, they might make trouble. Again, Frank did not answer. I realized that he was too loyal to Maxim to be drawn into a discussion, even with me. He did not know how much I knew. We were friends, we traveled the same road, but we dared not look at one another. Neither of us dared risk saying what we knew. In my room, I lay down on my bed. Perhaps they would question Frank as well, ask him about that evening over 12 months ago when Maxim had dinner at his house, the exact time that Maxim left. Whether anybody saw Maxim when he got back to Manderley, whether anyone could prove that Maxim went straight upstairs to bed. Mrs. Danvers might be called on. She might be questioned, and Maxim beginning to lose his temper, beginning to turn white. I must have fallen asleep because I woke suddenly at the first crack of thunder. I sat up. The hands on the clock were pointing to 5. I went to the window. There was not a breath of wind. The leaves hung still, waiting. The sky was grey. More thunder in the distance. No rain fell. I went down to the library, and at 5:30, Robert came in. The car has just driven up to the door now, ma'am. Which car? Mr. De Winter's car, ma'am. Is Mr. De Winter driving it himself? Yes, ma'am. I tried to get up, but my legs were weak. They would not hold. Sorry, bit of light. Sorry. I tried to get up, but my legs were weak. They would not hold me up. I stood leaning against the chair. My throat was very dry. After a minute, Maxim came in. He stood just inside the door. He looked tired, old. There were lines at the corners of his mouth I had never noticed before. It's all over, he said. I waited. Still, I could not speak or move towards him. She killed herself. Sorry, I'm a bit confused here. She killed herself. They were all in the dark, of course. They didn't know what to do. Oh, cool. So it seems like it's a suicide here. They conclude, they sort of conclude the case by saying that she killed herself. She killed herself. They were all in the dark, of course. They didn't know what to do. Killed herself. I sat down on the chair. But why? Goodness knows. They did not seem to think it necessary to decide. Old Horridge going on at me, wanting to know if Rebecca had any money troubles. Money troubles. He went on and stood by the window, looking out at the green grass. It's going to rain. Thank God it's going to rain at last. What happened? What did Horridge say? Why have you been there all this time? He went over and over the same ground again, said Maxim. Little details about the boat, that nobody cared about. I thought the door made me remember what I had to do. If you hadn't fainted like that, I would never have done it. I would never have done it. The shock reminded me, and then I knew exactly what I had to say and never took my eyes off old Horridge. I shall remember his face until my dying day. I'm so tired I can't see or hear or feel anything. He sat down, his head in his hands. I went and sat beside him. Where's Frank? I said. He had to go to the church. I would have gone too, but I wanted to come straight back to you. I kept thinking of you, waiting, all by yourself, not knowing what was going to happen. Why the church? We have to do something there this evening. Then I understood. They were going to bury Rebecca. Then it's fixed for 6:30. There won't be anybody hanging about. It was arranged yesterday. The inquiry doesn't make any difference. He looked tired, so deathly tired. I wish you didn't have to go out again, I said. It won't take long. I'll come with you. I shan't mind. Let me come with you. No, I don't want you to come. Then he left me, and I heard the sound of the car becoming fainter. Just after 7, the rain began to fall, gently at first, and so lightly that I could not see it. Then louder and faster. I left the windows wide open, stood in front of them, and breathed the cold, clean air. The rain fell on my face and hands. I came down thick and fast, so that I could not even see the trees. It came down, sorry. It came down thick and fast, so that I could not even see the trees. I did not hear Frith from come in at the door. Excuse me, ma'am, but do you know if Mr. de Winter will be long? No, not very long. There's a gentleman to see him, ma'am. He paused. I'm not quite sure what I ought to say. He's determined to see Mr. de Winter. Who is it? Anyone you know? Frith looked uncomfortable. Yes, ma'am. It's a gentleman who used to come here frequently at one time. Mr. Favell. I turned and shut the window. The rain was coming in on the cushions, and I looked at Frith. I think perhaps I had better see Mr. Favell, I said. Very good, ma'am. I went and stood beside the empty fireplace. It was just possible that I would be able to get rid of Favell before Maxim came back. I did not know what I was going to say to him, but I was not frightened. In a few moments, Frith showed him in. He looked rather untidy. His eyes looked red. I wondered if he had been drinking. I'm afraid Maxim isn't here, I said. I don't know when he will be back. Wouldn't it be better if you saw him at the office in the morning? Waiting doesn't worry me, said Favell, and I don't think I shall have to wait very long. I had a look in the dining room as I came along, and I see Max is expected to dinner all right. Our plans have been changed. It's quite possible that Maxim won't be home at all this evening. He's run off, has he? Said Favell with a half smile I did not like. I wonder if you really mean it. Tell me, are you feeling better? Too bad. Fainting like that this afternoon. I would have come to help, but I saw you had someone to help you. I expect Frank Crawley enjoyed himself. Did you let him drive you home? You wouldn't let me drive you 5 meters. He's jealous of Frank Crawley. What do you want to see Maxim about? You've grown up a bit since I saw you last, haven't you? I wonder what you've been doing. I don't think I shall mind very much if Max doesn't get back to dinner. What do you say? Mr. Faville, I said. I don't want to be rude, but I'm very tired. I've had a long day. If you can't tell me what you want to see Maxim about, it's not much good you're sitting here. It's not much good you're sitting here. You had far better to do as I suggest and go round to the office in the morning. No, no, no. Don't run away and leave me. I'm quite harmless, really, I am. And I think you're behaving very well over this. Really, very well. I take my hat off to you. I really do. His speech was very thick. I wished I had never told Frith I would see him. You come down here to Manderley, he said, waving his arm rather widely. You take on all this place, meet hundreds of people you've never seen before. You put up with old Max and his her. Don't give in to anyone. You just go your own way. I call it a good effort, and I don't care who hears me say so. A good effort. He steadied himself against the table. This business has been a shock to me, a terrible shock. Rebecca was my cousin. I was very fond of her. Yeah, very fond indeed. Always great friends, liked the same things, the same people, laughed at the same jokes. I suppose I was fonder of Rebecca than of anyone else in the world, and she was fond of him, of me. All this has been a great shock. Yes, I said. I'm very sorry for you. And what is Max going to do about it? That's what I want to know. Does he think I can sit back quietly now that the inquiry is over? Tell me that. He was not smiling anymore. He bent towards me. I'm going to see that justice is done for Rebecca. Killed herself? He leaned closer to me. You and I know she didn't, don't we? He leaned closer to me still. Don't we? He said slowly. The door opened, and Maxim came into the room, with Frank just behind him. Maxim stood quite still, with the door open. What the devil are you doing here? He said. Pavel turned his hands in his pockets. Then he began to smile as a matter of. Then he began to smile. As a matter of fact, Max, old man, I came to congratulate you on the results of the inquiry this afternoon. Do you mind leaving the house? Said Maxim. Or do you want Crawley and me to throw you out? Steady a moment, said Faville. He sat down on the arm of a chair. You don't want Frith to hear what I'm going to say, do you? Well, you will if you don't shut that door. Maxim did not move. I saw Frank close the door very quietly. Now listen here, Max, said Faville. You've come out of this affair very well, haven't you? Oh, yes. I was at the inquiry this afternoon. I was there from the start to finish. I saw your wife faint at a rather important moment, and I don't blame her. It could have gone either way for you, Max, couldn't it? And lucky for you that it went the way it did. You realize, don't you, Max, old man, that I can make things very unpleasant for you if I choose. Not only unpleasant, but shall I say dangerous? Still Maxim didn't move. He never took his eyes off Faville. Oh, yes, he said. In what way can you make things dangerous? Look here, Max, you know all about Rebecca and me. We were lovers, weren't we? I've never lied about it. Very well, then. Up to now, I believed, like every other fool, that Rebecca was drowned sailing in the bay and that her body was picked up at the Edgecombe weeks afterwards. He paused and sat there, looking at each one of us in turn. Then I picked up the evening paper a few days ago and read that Rebecca's boat had been found and that there was a body down below. I couldn't understand. I couldn't understand. I couldn't understand it. Who would Rebecca have have as a sailing companion? It didn't make sense. I came down here and stayed at the hotel. I got in touch with Mrs. Danvers. She told me that the body was Rebecca's. Even so, I thought, like everyone else, that the first body was a mistake and that Rebecca had somehow got shut in when she went down to get a coat. Well, I went to the inquiry today, as you know, and everything went smoothly, didn't it? Until Tab spoke. But after that, well, Max, old man, what have you got to say about those holes hammered in the bottom of the boat? Do you think, said Max slowly, that after all those hours of talk this afternoon, I'm going through it again with you? You heard the inquiry. That must satisfy you. Killed herself, huh? Rebecca killed herself. The sort of thing she would do, was it? Listen, you never knew I had this note, did you? I kept it because it was the last thing she ever wrote to me. I'll read it to you. I think it will interest you. He took a piece of paper out of his pocket. I tried to telephone you from the flat, he read, but could get no answer. I'm going down to Manderley right away. I shall be at the cottage this evening, and if you get this in time, will you get the car and follow me? I will spend the night at the cottage and leave the door open for you. I've got something to tell you, and I want to see you as soon as possible. Rebecca. He put the note back in his pocket. That's not the sort of note you write when you're going to kill yourself, is it? It was waiting for me at my flat. It was waiting for me at my flat when I got back at about 4 in the morning. I had no idea Rebecca was going to be in London that day, or I would have got in touch with her. As it was, I was at a party night that night. When I read the note, I decided it was too late to start driving for 6 hours down to Manderley. I went to bed, determined to put through a call later in the day. I did, and I learned that Rebecca had been drowned. He sat there looking at Maxim. Supposing I had produced that note at the inquiry this afternoon, it would have been awkward for you, wouldn't it, Max, old man? Well, why didn't you? Steady, old boy. You need to get worried. You've never been a friend to me, but I don't mind. All married men with lovely wives are jealous, aren't they? I don't blame them now. I don't blame them. Now, Max, I've laid all my cards on the table. Why can't we come to some agreement? I'm not a rich man. I'm too fond of taking risks for that. But what worries me is not having anything in the bank to fall back on. Now, if I had a settlement or two of £2,000 or £3,000 a year for life, I could get along quite comfortably. And I'd never trouble you again. I swear I wouldn't. I've asked you to leave the house, said Maxim. I'm not going to ask you again. There's the door. You can open it yourself. Half a minute, Maxim, said Frank. It's not quite so easy as that. He turned to Favell. I see what you're after. It happens, unfortunately, that you could twist things round and make it difficult for Maxim. It happens for that you could twist things around and make it difficult. It's her talking here. Bit funny here. Half a minute, Maxim, said Frank. As it's Frank, sorry. Sorry, it's a little bit late today. Half a minute, Maxim, said Frank. It's not quite so easy as that. He turned to Favel. So it's Frank talking to Favel. I see what you're after. It happens, unfortunately, that you could twist things round and make it difficult for Maxim. I don't think he sees that as clear as I do. What is the exact amount you suggest that Maxim should settle on you? I saw Maxim go white. Don't get involved with this, Frank, he said. This is my affair. I'm not going to give away to threats. You think you can frighten me, don't you, Favel? Well, you're wrong. I'm not afraid of anything you can do. Shall I ring up Colonel Julian and ask him to come over? He's the Justice of Peace. He'll be interested in your story. Hi, Etienne. Welcome. Favel looked hard at him. Then he laughed. Favel, a good try, he said, but it won't work. You wouldn't dare ring up old Julian. I've enough here to hang you, Max, old man. Maxim walked slowly across the library and into the little room beyond. Stop him, I said to Frank. Stop him, I said to Frank. So that's Mrs. De Winter talking. Stop him, please. Frank went over to him quickly. I heard Maxim's voice, very cool, very calm. I want Careth 17, he said. Favel was watching the door. Leave me alone, I heard Maxim say to Frank. Then, is that Colonel Julian? Is the Winter here? Yes. Yes, I know. I wonder if you could possibly come over to Manderley immediately. It's rather urgent. I can't explain why on the telephone, but you hear everything when you come. I'm sorry to have to drag you out. Yes, thank you very much. Goodbye. He came back again into the room. Julian is coming now, he said. He went to the windows and threw them open. It was still raining very hard. He stood there with his back to us, breathing the cold air. We none of us said anything. There was no sound but the falling rain, sorry. I felt helpless. There was nothing I could do. I had to sit there, watching the rain. It was raining too hard to hear the car. We did not know Colonel Julian had arrived until the door opened and Frith showed him in. I think you realize, Maxim said, that I haven't brought you out an evening like this for a social half hour before dinner. This is Jack Favel, my first wife's cousin. Go ahead, Favel. Favel got up. The short wait seemed to have calmed him. He was not smiling any longer. I had the feeling that he was not too pleased at the way things had happened and was not ready for Colonel Julian. He began speaking in a loud and unpleasant voice. Look here, Colonel Julian. I'll come straight to the point. The reason why I'm here is that I'm not satisfied with the results of the inquiry this afternoon. Oh, said Colonel Julian. Isn't that for De Winter to say? No, I don't think it is. I have a right to speak. Not only as Rebecca's cousin, but as the man she would have married if she had lived. Colonel Julian looked very surprised. I see. Is this true, De Winter? It's the first I've heard of it. said Maxim. Colonel Julian looked from one to the other doubtfully. Look here, Favel, he said. What exactly is your trouble? Favel stared at him at a moment. I could see that he was planning something in his mind, but had had too much to drink to be able to carry out. He put his hand in his pocket, and before Rebecca is supposed and brought out Rebecca's note. This note was written a few hours before Rebecca is supposed to have set out to kill herself at sea. Here it is. Read it and say whether you think the woman who wrote that note had made up her mind to kill herself. Colonel Julian read the note. Then he handed it back. No, on the face of it, no, but I don't know what she was going to tell you. Perhaps you do, or perhaps de Winter does. Maxim said nothing. My cousin made a definite point in that note, didn't she? She clearly asked me to drive down to Manderley that night because she had something to tell me. She made the appointment, and she was to spend the night in the cottage on the purpose to see me alone. The fact of her going for a sail does not surprise me. It was the sort of thing she did after a long day in London. But to hammer holes in the floor on the boat and drown herself? Oh no, Colonel Julian. By God, no. The colour had flooded into his face, and the last words were shouted. I could see that Colonel Julian did not like Favel. My dear man, it's not the slightest use you're losing your temper with me. You say you refuse to believe that your cousin killed herself, but you heard what the boat builder said. The holes were there. Suppose we get to the point. What do you suggest? Really? What happened? What do you suggest really happened? Favel turned his head and looked slowly toward Maxim. He was twisting the note between his fingers. Rebecca never made those holes. She never killed herself. Rebecca was murdered. And if you want to know who the murderer is, there he stands by the window there. He couldn't even wait, could he, until a year had passed before marrying the first girl he set eyes on. There is your murderer for you, Mr. Maximilian de Winter. Take a long look at him. He'd look well hanging, wouldn't he? He'd look well hanging, wouldn't he? And Favel began to laugh. The laugh of a man began to laugh. The laugh of a man who had been drinking, high and foolish, all the time twisting Rebecca's note between his fingers. Thank God for Favel's laugh. Thank God for his pointing fingers, his red face, his wide eyes. Thank God for the way he stood there, rocking slightly on his feet. It put Colonel Julian on our side. The man's been drinking, he said quietly. He doesn't know what he's saying. Been drinking, have I? Shouted Favel. Oh no, my fine friend, you may be a justice of the peace, but a colonel too. But that means nothing to me. I've got the law on my side for a change, and I'm going to use it. There are other justices of the peace besides you. Men with brains in their heads. Max de Winter murdered Rebecca, and I'm going to prove it. Wait a minute, Mr. Favel, said Colonel Julian quietly. You were at the inquiry this afternoon. If you felt so deeply about it, why didn't you produce that letter in the court? Favel looked hard at him, then laughed. Because I didn't choose to. That's why. I preferred to come and deal with the winter personally. That's why I asked you to come here, said Maxim, walking forward from the window. I asked him the same question. He said he was not a rich man and that if I cared to settle 2 or 3 thousand a year on him for life, he would never worry me again. Frank was here and my wife. They both heard him. Ask them. It's perfectly true, said Frank. Mr. Feville, said Colonel Julian, you have just made a serious accusation against Mr. de Winter. Have you any proof? Proof, said Feville. What the devil do you want with proof? Aren't those holes in the boat proof enough? Certainly not, unless you can produce a witness who saw him do it. Where is your witness? A witness? Who else would kill Rebecca? I'll tell you, De Winter killed Rebecca because of me. He knew I was her lover. He was madly jealous. He knew she was waiting for me at the cottage, and he went down that night and killed her. Then he put her body on the boat and sank it. Quite a clever story, Feville, in its way. But you have no proof. Produce a witness who saw it happen, and I might begin to take you seriously. Wait a minute, said Feville. Wait a minute. There's quite a good chance that De Winter might have been seen that night. I suddenly knew what Feville meant, and in a flash of fear and horror, I knew that he was right. Little sentences came back to me. She's down there all right. She'll not come back again. The fishes have eaten her up by now, haven't they? Ben had seen, remember, those are the questions and the sentences that Ben was saying before. Ben, with his poor, foolish brain, had been a witness all the time. There's the local man who spends his time on the shore. He was often round when I was down there with Rebecca. He used to sleep in the woods in hot weather. The man's a fool, and would never have come forward on his own. But I can make him talk if he did see anything that night. And there is a good chance he did. He must mean Ben, said Frank, with a quick look at Maxim. He's the son of one of our men, but he's not responsible for what he says or does. He's not very intelligent. Sorry. What the devil does that matter? Said Feville. He's got eyes, hasn't he? He knows what he sees. He's only got to answer yes or no. Can we get hold of this man and question him? Asked Colonel Julian. Of course. Drive down to his mother's cottage. Frank, and bring him back. We want to end this thing, don't we? The door opened, and Frank came in. He turned and spoke to someone in the hall outside. All right, Ben, he said quietly. There is nothing to be frightened of. Ben came awkwardly into the room. He looked strange without his hat. I realized for the first time that he had no hair. He looked different, horrible. The light seemed to confuse him. He looked foolishly around the room. Then Feville walked towards him. Hello, he said. How has life treated you since we last met? Ben looked at him, giving no sign that he recognized him. He did not answer. Well, said Feville, you know who I am, don't you? Huh? You know who I am, don't you? Colonel Julian walked across to him. You shall go home in a few minutes, Ben. No one's going to hurt you. We just want you to answer 1 or 2 questions. You know Mr. Favell, don't you? This time, Ben shook his head. Never seen him, he said. Don't be a fool. You know you've seen me. You've seen me. You've seen me go to the cottage on the shore, haven't you? No, said Ben. I never see no one. A useful witness, said Colonel Julian. Favell swung round on him. Someone has got at this fool someone has got at this fool and paid him. I'll tell you, he's seen me lots of times. I never seen you, said. Sorry, it's quite late. The day has been long in them. So my apologies. Someone has got to this fool and paid him. I tell you, he's seen me lots of times. I never seen you, said Ben. Then he took hold of Frank's arm. Has he come to take me to the madhouse? I don't want to go to the madhouse. They're cruel people in there. They're cruel to people in there. I want to stay home. I done nothing. That's all right, Ben, said Colonel Julian. No one's going to put you in the madhouse. Now, you remember the lady who had the boat? She's gone. Yes, we know that. She used to sail the boat, didn't she? Were you on the shore when she sailed it the last time, when she didn't come back again? Eh? You were there, weren't you? Said Favell. You saw Mrs. de Winter come down to the cottage, and later you saw Mr. de Winter too? He went to the cottage after her. What happened then? Go on, what happened? Ben drew back against the wall. I see nothing. I want to stay at home. I'm not going to the madhouse. I've never seen you. Never before. He began to cry like a child. Your witness doesn't seem to have helped you, said Colonel Julian. He's been paid, shouted Favell. Paid to tell this string of lies. Frank took Ben out of the room. The man seemed to be frightened, said Colonel Julian to Maxim. I was watching him. He's never been treated badly, has he? No, said Maxim. He's perfectly harmless. I've always let him do as he pleased. He's been frightened at some time, said Colonel. He was showing the whites of his eyes, just like a dog does when you're going to whip him. Well, why didn't you? Said Favell. He'd have remembered me all right if you had whipped him. He hasn't helped you, has he? Said Colonel Julian. You say you were going to marry Mrs. de Winter and that you used to meet her secretly in the cottage. You can't even prove that story, can you? Can't I? Said Favell. I saw him smile. I came across to the fireplace and rang the bell. I guess what was going to happen. Frith answered the bell. Ask Mrs. Danvers to come here. Ask Mrs. Danvers to come here, said Favell. Then he turned to Colonel Julian. Mrs. Danvers was Rebecca's personal friend. Then he turned to Colonel. Okay. Mrs. Danvers was Rebecca's personal friend. She was with her for years before she married. You will find her a very different sort of witness from Ben. Frank looked quickly at Maxim. Sorry. Colonel Julian saw the look and his lips tightened. I did not like it. We all waited, watching the door. Mrs. Danvers came into the room and stood by the door, her hands folded in front of her, looking from one to the other of us. First of all, Mrs. Danvers, I want to ask you a question, said Colonel Julian. Do you know of the relationship between late Mrs. de Winter and Mr. Favell here? They were cousins, said Mrs. Danvers. I mean, closer than that. Closer than that. I'm afraid I don't understand, sir. Oh, nonsense, Danny, said Favell. You know what he means. You know Rebecca and I had lived together on and off for years, hadn't we? She was in love with me, wasn't she? Mrs. Danvers looked at him for a moment. She was not. Listen to me, you old, began Favell, but Mrs. Danvers cut him short. She was not in love with you. Or Mrs. de Winter. She was not in love with anyone. She hated men. She was above all that. Favell was said. Oh, Favell said angrily. Now listen. Didn't she come through the woods to meet me night after night? Didn't you wait up for her? Didn't she spend the weekends with me in London? Well, said Mrs. Danvers with sudden anger. And what if she did? She had a right to amuse herself, hadn't she? Love-making was a game for her. Only a game. She told me so. She did it because it made her laugh. It made her laugh. I tell you, she laughed at you as she laughed at all the rest. I've known her come back and sit upstairs in bed and rock with laughter at the lot of you. There was something horrible in this. Oh, that's the narrator now. There was something horrible in the sudden rush of words, something horrible and unexpected. It made me feel sick, even though I knew Maxim had gone very white. Favell looked at her foolishly as though he had not understood. There was no sound, but that of the falling rain. Then Colonel Julian spoke quietly, slowly. Mrs. Danvers, can you think of any reason at all why Mrs. de Winter would have taken her own life? No, she said, shaking her head. No. There you see, said Favell quickly. It's impossible. She knows that as well as I do. Be quiet, will you? Give Mrs. Danvers time to think. She wrote that note sometime during those hours she spent in London. There was something she wanted to tell you. Let Mrs. Danvers read the note. She read it twice, shaking her head. It's no use, she said. I don't know what she meant. There was something important she had to tell Mr. Jack. She would have told me first. Does anyone know how she spent the day in London? Favell swore under his breath. Look here. She left that note at my flat at 3 in the morning. It's 3 in the afternoon. The servant saw her. She must have driven down here straight after that. Mrs. de Winter had an appointment to have her hair done, said Mrs. Danvers. I remember that because I telephoned to London for her. 12 until 1:30. She had lunch at her club after that. Say it took her half an hour to have lunch. What was she doing from 2 o'clock until 3? Oh, who cares what she was doing? Oh, who cares what she was doing? Shouted Favell. She didn't kill herself. That's the only thing that matters. I have her appointment book locked away in my room, said Mrs. Danvers slowly. She may have noted down her appointments for that day. She was very careful in that way. She used to write everything down and then mark it with a cross when it was done. Well, De Winter, what do you say? Do you mind us seeing this book? Of course not, said Maxim. Why on earth should I? Once again, I saw Colonel Julian gave him that strange, quick look. Mrs. Danvers came back with a small red book. I was right, she said. She had marked down her appointments, as I said. She gave the little book to Colonel Julian. There was a long pause while he looked down the page. There was something about that moment that frightened me more than anything that had happened that evening. I couldn't look at Maxim. Ah, he said. His finger was in the middle of the page. Something's going to happen. I thought, something terrible. Yes, here it is. Hair at 12, as Mrs. Danvers said, and a cross beside it. She kept her appointment then. Lunch in the club, and a cross beside that. What have we? What have we here? What have we here, though? Baker, 2 o'clock. Who was Baker? He looked at Maxim. Maxim shook his head. Then at Mrs. Danvers. Baker? Repeated Mrs. Danvers. She knew no one called Becker. I've never. Oh, sorry. It's Mrs. Danvers speaking. She knew no one called Baker? I've never heard the name before. Well, here it is, said Colonel Julian, giving her the little book. Baker. And she's put a great cross beside it, as though she wanted to break the pencil. It looks as though she saw this Baker, whoever he may have been. I believe if we knew who he was, we would get to the bottom of the whole affair. She had no enemy, no one who had ever threatened her. She had no enemy or no one who had ever threatened her, no one she was afraid of. Mrs. de Winter, afraid. She was afraid of nothing and no one. Only one thing ever worried her, and that was the idea of getting old, of illness, of dying in her bed. She said to me many times, when I go, Danny, I want to go out quickly, like a light. That's the only thing that comforted me. They said drowning, they say drowning is painless, don't they? Suddenly she gave a cry. There is something here, right at the back, among the telephone numbers. Baker, 0488. That's all. That's his number, all right, said Colonel Julian. But why didn't she put the exchange? Try every telephone exchange in London, said Favell. It will only take you all night, and Max wants to play for time. Don't you, Max? And so should I, if I were in your shoes. Could this mark beside the... Ah, okay, sorry. So here there is a mark on the book. Could this mark beside the number possibly be an M? Mrs. Danvers took the little book in her hands again. It might be. It's not like your usual M, but she may have written it in a hurry. Yes, it might be M. Well, said Maxim, something had better be done about it. Frank, go through the exchange for Mayfair 0488. I stood quite still. Maxim did not look at me. Frank went into the little room in a moment. In a moment, we heard him say, "Is that Mayfair 0488? Can you tell me if anyone of the name of Baker lives there?" "Oh, I see. I'm so sorry. Yes, I must have got the wrong number. Thank you." Then he came back into the room. "Someone called Lady Eastley lives at Mayfair. 0488. They have never heard of Baker." Favell gave great shouts of laughter. Go on. What's the next exchange on the list? A try museum? Said Mrs. Danvers. Frank looked at Maxim. Go ahead, said Maxim. Again, Frank went to the other room. He left the door wide open. Hello, is that Museum 0488? Can you tell me if anyone of the name of Baker lives there? Oh, who is that speaking? Oh, yes, yes, I understand. Can you give me the address? Yes, it's rather important. He paused and said to us over his shoulder, I think we've got him. Oh, don't let it be true. Don't let. So here, that's Mrs. de Winter speaking to herself. Oh, don't let it be true. Don't let Baker be found. I knew who Baker was. I had known all along. I watched Frank lean forward suddenly, reaching for his pencil and paper. Hello? Yes, I'm still here. Could you spell it? Thank you very much. Good night. He came back into the room, the piece of paper in his hand. Frank, who loved Maxim, who did not know that with that one piece of paper, he could destroy Maxim as well as truly as if he had a knife in his hand. It was the servant and an address in Bloomsbury. No one lives there. It is used during the day by a doctor. It seems that Baker has retired and left the place 6 months ago. But we can find him. All right. The man told me his address. I wrote it down on the piece of paper. It was then that Maxim looked at me for the first time that evening, and in his eyes I read the last message, a final goodbye. Favell, Mrs. Danvers, Colonel Julian, Frank, with a slip of paper in his hand. They were all forgotten at this time. Then he turned away and said to Frank, Well done. What's the address? Somewhere near Barnet, to the north London. But it's not on the telephone. We can't ring him up. Can you throw any light on the matter now? Colonel Julian asked Mrs. Danvers. She shook her head. Mrs. de Winter never needed a doctor, and like many strong people, she hated them. We only had Dr. Phillips from Kerrith. Here once. I've never heard her speak of this Dr. Baker. What the devil does it matter who he was? If it was of any importance, Danny would know. Rebecca had no secrets from her. The servant at Museum 0488 told me that he was a very well-known doctor, a woman specialist. Said Colonel Julian. There must have been something wrong with her after all. But it seems very strange that she didn't say anything even to you, Mrs. Danvers. She was too thin, said Favell. I told her so, but she only laughed. She said it suited her. Did it on purpose, I suppose. Like all these women. She probably went to Baker for advice about what she should eat. I can't understand it, said Mrs. Danvers. Dr. Baker, why didn't she tell me? She used to tell me everything. Perhaps she didn't want to worry you, said Colonel Julian. She made an appointment with him and saw him and was going to tell you all about it that night. And the note to Mr. Jack and Mrs. Danvers suddenly. Suddenly, I have something to tell you. I must see you. She was going to tell me, she was going to tell me too. I believe you're right after all, said Favell. The note and the appointment do seem to go together. But what the devil was it all about? That's what I want to know. What was the matter with her? The truth shouted in their ears, and they did not understand. I dared not to look at them. I dared not even more. No, I dare not even move. Sorry. It ought to be quite easy to find out, said Frank. I can write and ask him if he remembers an appointment last year with Mrs. de Winter. I don't know if he would answer you, said Colonel Julian. You know what these doctors are. The only way to get anything out of him would be to get de Winter to see him himself and explain things. I'm ready to do whatever you suggest, said Maxim quietly. Anything for time? Anything for time, huh? Said Favell. A lot can be done in 24 hours, can't it? Trains can be caught, ships can fill, planes can fly. I saw Mrs. Danvers look sharply from Favell to Maxim and realized that she had not known about Favell's accusation. At last, she was beginning to understand. I could tell from the expression on her face. It's too late, I thought. She can't do anything to us now. She can't hurt us anymore. Maxim was talking to Colonel Julian. What do you suggest? He said. Shall I drive to this address in the morning? He is not going alone, said Favell with a short laugh. I have a right to say that. Haven't I? Send him up with the Inspector Welsh, and I shan't object. If only Mrs. Danvers would take her eyes away from Maxim. Frank had seen her now. He was watching her, confused and anxious. I saw him look once more at the piece of paper in his hand, on which she had written Dr. Baker's address. Then he too looked at Maxim. I believe that he began to get some faint idea of the truth, because he went very white and put the paper down on the table. I don't think there is any need to bring Inspector Welsh into the affair yet, said Colonel Julian. His voice was different, harder. I did not like the way he used the word yet. Why must he use it at all? I did not like it. If I go with de Winter and stay with him the whole time and bring him back, will that satisfy you? Favell looked at Maxim, then at Colonel Julian. Yes, he said slowly. Yes, I suppose so. But for safety, do you mind if I come too? No, unfortunately, I don't think... No, unfortunately, I think you have the right to ask that. I rather think this Dr. Baker is going to prove my case after all. Said Favell. He looked round at each of us, and began to laugh. I think he too had understood at last the meaning of that visit to the doctor. Well, he said, what time are we going to start? 9 o'clock? 9 o'clock, said Colonel Julian. 9 o'clock? How do we know he won't run off in the night? Asked Favell. He's only going to slip round to the garage and get into the car. Get into his car. Is my word good enough for you? Said Maxim, turning to Colonel Julian, and for the first time Colonel Julian paused. Maxim's face went pale. Mrs. Danvers, he said slowly, when Mrs. de Winter and I When Mrs. De Winter and I go to bed tonight, will you come up yourself and lock the door on the outside and call us yourself at 7 in the morning? Yes, sir, said Mrs. De Winter. Mrs. Danvers. Very well, then, said Colonel Julian shortly. I don't think there is anything else we need to discuss tonight. I shall be here at 9 in the morning. You will have room for me in your car. You will have room in your car for me? You will have room for me in your car, De Winter? Yes, said Maxim. And Favel will follow us in his. Right on your tail, my dear Colonel. Right on your tail. Colonel Julian came up to me and took my hand. Good night, he said. You know how I feel for you in all this. There's no need for me to tell you. Get your husband to bed early if you can. It's going to be a long day. He held my hand a minute and then he turned away. It was strange. It was strange the way he avoided my eye. I suppose I'm going to be asked to dinner, Pavel said. I suppose I'm not going to be asked to dinner, Pavel said. Never mind. I'm looking forward to tomorrow. Goodbye, then, old man. Pleasant dreams. Make the most of your night behind that locked door. He turned and laughed at me, and then he went out of the room. Mrs. Danvers, followed him. Maxim and I were alone. I held out my arms to him, and he came to me like a child. I put my arms round him and held him. We did not say anything for a long time. We can sit together, he said at last, driving up in the car. Yes. Juliet won't mind. No. We shall have tomorrow night too, he said. They won't do anything immediately. Not for 24 hours, perhaps. I remember every detail of that evening. The curtains had been closed. It seemed strange to be sitting in the dining room and not looking out onto the gardens. It was like the beginning of autumn. Later the telephone rang. I heard Beatrice at the other end. Is that you? We've been trying to get you. We saw the evening papers, she said. The result of the inquiry was a terrible shock to both Giles and myself. What does Maxim say about it? I think it was a shock to everybody, I said. But my dear, I can't believe it. Why on earth would Rebecca have killed herself, the most unlikely person in the world? There must be a mistake somewhere. I don't know. What does Maxim say? Where is he? People have been here, I said. Colonel Julian and others. Maxim is very tired. We're going up to London tomorrow. What on earth for? Something to do with the result. I can't really explain. You ought to get it changed. Surely Colonel Julian can do something. What are justices of the peace for? Old Holridge must have been mad. Why was she supposed to have done it? Someone ought to get hold of Tab. How can he tell whether those holes in the boat were made on purpose or not? Gaia says, of course, it must have been the rocks. He's tired, more tired than anything else. Tell him he must try to get the results of the inquiry changed. It's so bad for the family. I'm telling everybody here that it's a mistake. Rebecca would never have killed herself. She wasn't the type. It's no use, I said. It's too late. Please, Beatrice, don't try to do anything. It would only make things worse. Please, Beatrice, just leave it alone. Thank God she had not been with us today. There was a sudden noise on the telephone line. I heard Beatrice saying, "Hello, hello." And then there was silence. I went back to the library. In a few minutes, the telephone began ringing again. I let it ring. I went and sat down at Maxim's feet. It went on ringing. I did not move. Maxim put his arms around me, and we kissed feverishly, desperately, like lovers have not kissed before. As if they were really falling in love for each other now. Chapter 10. The visit to Dr. Baker. Okay, so let's see why she went to the doctor. Maybe you might have guessed already. So here we have just a couple of pages, 10-ish pages. So bear with me. Okay. I try not to fall asleep. Oh my God. Sorry about the yawning. Okay. When I awoke the next morning just after 6 o'clock and got up and went to the window, the grass was wet and the trees were hidden in a white mist. In a white mist. The air was cold, the smell of autumn. As I knelt by the window looking down on the rose garden, the events of the day before seemed far away and quite unreal. Here at Manderley, a new day was starting. The creatures in the garden were not concerned with our troubles. I remember this is the phrase that Daphne du Maurier uses in a way to show that nature is above all the characters and everything in the story, and that whatever happens to Maxim or Favel, nature moves on and will continue. A blackbird ran across the rose garden in quick, short rushes. A seabird hung in the air, silent and alone, and then spread his wings wide and floated down over the woods towards the happy valley. These things continued. Our worries and fears did not change them. No one would ever hurt Manderley. It would lie always in its hollow, guarded by the woods, safe and secret, while the sea broke and ran and came again over the white stones of the little bay below. My case looked unfamiliar as I dragged it out of the cupboard. It seemed so long since I had used it, yet it was only 4 months ago. In one of the pockets was a ticket for a theatre in Monte Carlo. It might have belonged to another age, another world. My bedroom began to take on the appearance of every room when the owners go away. Empty and unloved. When I was half away down the passage, I had a strange feeling that I must go back and look once more. I stood for a moment, looking at the open cupboard, the empty bed, the tea on the table. I wondered why they had the power to touch me, to sadden me, as though they were children who did not want me to go away. After breakfast, Frank arrived. Colonel Julian is waiting down at the gate, he said. I'll be in the office all day in case you telephone. After you've seen Baker, you may find you want me up in London. Yes, said Maxim. Yes, perhaps. It's just 9 now. It's just 9 now. You're on time. It's going to be fun. It's going to be sunny. You should have a good run. We'd better be off, said Maxim. Old Julian will be getting worried. I climbed into the car beside Maxim. Frank shut the door. You'll telephone, won't you? He said. Yes, of course. He looked back at the house. Frith was standing at the top of the steps, and Robert just behind. My eyes filled with tears for no reason. I turned away so that nobody would see. Then Maxim started up. Then Maxim started up the car, and we turned the corner, and the house was hidden from us. We stopped at the gate and picked up Colonel Julian. He looked doubtful when he saw me. It's going to be a long day, he said. I don't think you should have attempted it. I would have taken care of your husband, you know. I wanted to come, I said. He did not say any more about it, but got in the back. That man, but got in the back. That man, Faville, said he. That man, Faville, said he would pick us up the road if he is not there. If he's not there, don't wait. We would do much better without him. But when we came to the crossroads, I saw the long green body of his car, and my heart sank. I had thought he might not be on time. He was sitting smoking at the wheel, hatless. He waved us. He waved us on when he saw us. I settled down in my seat for the journey ahead, one hand on Maxim's knee. The green car kept close behind us. We came to the edge of London at 3:00. It was then that I began to feel tired. The noise and the heat gave me a headache. It was hot. The streets had that dusty look of August, and the leaves hung still on the dull trees. There had been no rain here. There were too many people, too much noise. The drive through London seemed endless. By the time we were through it, and out beyond Hampstead, there was a sound in my head like the beating of a drum, and my eyes were burning. I wondered how tired Maxim was. He was pale, and there were shadows under his eyes. When we came to Barnet itself, Colonel Julian made him stop every few minutes. Can you tell us where a house called Roselands is? It belongs to Dr. Baker, who has retired and come to live here recently. Behind us came Faville, his low green car covered with dust. It was the postman who pointed out the house in the end, a square house with no name on the gate, which we had already passed twice. Maxim spotted the car at the side of the road. We sat silently for a few moments. Well, here we are, said Colonel Julian. And it's exactly 12 minutes past 5. We shall catch them in the middle of their tea. We got out of the car and Faville came up. We walked up the drive to the front door, a strange little party. Colonel Julian rang the bell. A very young servant opened the door and looked surprised that there were so many of us. Dr. Baker? Said Colonel Julian. Yes, sir. Will you come in? She opened a door on the left into a room which looked not much used in summer. Faville examined a picture on the wall. Colonel Julian stood by the empty fireplace. Maxim and I looked out of the window. Then the door opened and a man came into the room. He was of average height, rather long in the face, with a firm jaw. His hair was turning grey. Forgive me for keeping you waiting, he said, looking a little surprised, as the servant had done. At seeing so many of you. Had seeing so many of you. I don't know why I changed my intonation. I had to run upstairs and wash. I was in the garden when the bell rang. Won't you sit down? I sat down in the nearest chair and waited. I'm so sorry to disturb you like this, said Colonel Julian. My name is Julian. This is Mr. De Winter, Mrs. De Winter, Mr. Favell. You may have seen Mr. De Winter's name on the papers recently. Oh, said Dr. Baker. Yes, yes, I suppose I have. Some inquiry or other, wasn't there? My wife was reading all about it. It was said that it was said at the inquiry that the first Mrs. De Winter killed herself, said Favell, which I say is completely out of the question. Mrs. De Winter was my cousin. I knew her very well. She would never have done such a thing. She had no reason to. What we want to know is what the devil she came to see you about on the day she died. You had better to leave this to Julian and myself, Maxim said quietly. Dr. Baker has not the faintest idea what you mean. He turned to the door. We have driven up to see you today because we found your name in the telephone number of your old rooms in my first wife's appointment book. Of your old rooms in my first wife's appointment book. She seems to have been to see. She seems to have been to see you at 2 o'clock on the last day she ever spent in London. Could you possibly check this for us? When Maxim had finished, Dr. Baker shook his head. I'm very sorry, he said, but I think you have made a mistake. I should have remembered the name of De Winter. I should have remembered the name De Winter. I've never attended a Mrs. De Winter in my life. Colonel Julian brought out the little book. Here it is, written down, he said. Baker, 2 o'clock, and a big cross beside it to show that the appointment was kept. And here's what looks like your number, Museum 0488. Dr. Baker examined it. That's very strange. Yes, the number is correct, as you say. Could she have come to see you and given another name? Why, yes, that's possible. It's unusual, of course. I've never encouraged that sort of thing. It doesn't do us any good in the profession. Would you have any record of the visit among your papers? Said Colonel Julian. I know this is not normally done, but we do feel that her appointment with you must be connected with her. But we do feel that her appointment with you must be connected with her murder, said Favell, interrupting him. Dr. Baker opened his eyes wide. I had no idea there was any question of that, he said quietly. Of course, I'll do anything in my power to help you. If you excuse me for a few minutes, I will go and look among my papers. There should be a record of every appointment and a description of the case. He went out. Seems a good sort, said Colonel Julian. Why didn't he offer us a drink? Said Favell. Keeps it locked up, I suppose. I don't think much of him. I don't believe he's going to help us after all. Dr. Baker came back into the room with books and a pile of papers in his hands. He carried them over to the table. I've brought the collection for the last year, he said. I haven't been through them since we moved. I only retired 6 months ago, you know. He opened the book and began turning the pages. I watched him helplessly. He would find it. Of course, it was only a question of minutes now, of seconds. The 7th, 8th, 10th, he said. The 12th, did you say? At 2 o'clock? We none of us moved. We all watched his face. We all watched his face. Sorry, we none of us moved. We all watched his face. I saw a Mrs. Danvers on the 12th. at 2 o'clock. Danny? What on earth? Began Favel. But Maxim cut him short. She gave a false name, of course, he said. That was obvious from the first. Do you remember the visit now, Dr. Baker? But Dr. Baker was already searching in his papers. He soon found the notes and read them rapidly. Yes, he said. Mrs. Danvers, I remember now. He put the papers down. Of course, he said to Maxim. You realize that this is very unprofessional, but your wife is dead, and I quite understand that the situation is unusual. You want to know if I can suggest any reason why your wife might have taken her life? I think I can. The woman who called herself Mrs. Danvers was very seriously ill. Ill. He paused. He looked at every one of us in turn. I remember her perfectly well. She came to me a week before the date you mentioned, and I took some X-ray photographs of her. The second visit was to hear what the X-rays showed. I remember her holding out her hand for them. I want to know the truth, she said. I don't want you to be gentle with me. Just tell me. He paused and looked down at the notes. I waited. Why couldn't he finish with it and let us go? Why must we sit there waiting our eyes on his face? Well, she asked for the truth, and I let her have it. Some people, I'll bet for it, hiding the facts does them no good. She stood it very well. She said she had guessed it for some time. Then she paid me and went out. I never saw her again. He closed the book and put the papers back in the pile. The pain was still slight, but the growth was deep-rooted. In 3 or 4 months' time, there would have been nothing to do but try to kill the pain and wait. There is nothing else anyone can do in a case like that. No one said a word. Of course, she still looked a perfectly healthy woman, rather too thin, I remember, and rather pale, but then that's the fashion now. The X-rays showed a certain faulty development in some of the organs, I remember, which meant she could never had a child, but that was nothing to do with the disease. I remember hearing Colonel Julian speak, saying something about Dr. Baker being very kind to have taken so much trouble. You have told us all we want to know, he said, and if we could possibly have a copy of your notes, it might be very useful. Of course, of course. We may not need it at all, but either De Winter or I will write. Here is my card. I'm so glad to have been of use. It never entered my head that Mrs. De Winter and Mrs. Danvers could be the same person. No, naturally. You'll be returning to London, I imagine? Your best way is to turn sharp left at the corner, then right by the church. After that, it's a straight road. Thank you very much. We came out onto the drive and walked to the car. No one spoke. Favel looked grey and shaken. I never had the slightest idea, he said. She kept it a secret from everyone, even Danny. What a terrible thing, yeah? No, not the sort of thing one would ever connect with Rebecca. Do you people feel like a drink? This business has really shocked me, and I don't mind admitting it. My God. He leaned up against the car and shaded his eyes with his hand. Pull yourself together, man, said Colonel Julian. Oh, you're right. You're fine, said Favel, standing up straight and looking at Colonel Julian and Maxim. Baker will supply. Baker will supply what you want in black and white, free of cost, whenever you send the word. Shall we get to the car and eat and go? Said Colonel Julian. We can make our plans as we drive. We got in, but Favel still leaned against the car. I should advise you to get straight back to your flat and go to bed, said Colonel Julian. And drive slowly. I may as well warn you now that as the Justice of Peace, I have certain powers that will prove effective if you are ever seen in Carith area again. We know how to deal with people like you, strange though it may seem. Favel was watching Maxim. He had lost the grey collar now, and the old unpleasant smile was forming on his lips. Yes, it's been a stroke of luck for you. For you, Max, hasn't it? He said slowly. You think you've won, don't you? But the law can still get you, and so can I, in a different way. Such a twisted and wicked man. Maxim started the engine. Have you anything else to say? He said. Because if so, you had better say it now. No, said Favel. No, I won't keep you. You can go. He stepped back, with the smile still on his lips. The car slid forward. As we turned the corner, I looked back and saw him standing there, watching us. As he waved his hand, he was laughing. We drove on for a while in silence. Then Colonel Julian spoke. He can't do anything, he said. That smile and that wave were only part of his pretense. They're all alike, is his sort. He hasn't a thread of a case to bring now. Baker would wreck it. I always felt the solution was connected with Baker. The way she never even told Miss Danvers. She knew something was wrong. Terrible. Enough to send a young and lovely woman right off her head. I suppose you never had any idea of this? No, said Maxim. No. Of course, some people always live in fear of disease like that. Women, especially. That must have been the case with your wife. She had enough courage for everything except that. She could not face pain. But that's very sexist to say. So I guess, I don't know, perhaps Daphne du Maurier wanted to kind of portray this as sexism. Or did she think about that? Did she believe that? I don't know. Well, she was spared that at any rate. Yes, said Maxim. In a sense that it feels like Rebecca pushed Maxim to his limits because she knew that he would kill her because she couldn't do it herself. I don't think it would do any harm if I quietly let it be known down in Carith that a London doctor has suggested an explanation. In case people talk, you never can tell, you know. People are funny. If they knew about Mrs. de Winter, it might make it a lot easier for you. I don't suppose the newspaper man will worry you anymore. That's one good thing. You'll find they'll drop the whole affair in a day or two. We drove on southward and entered London once more. 6:30. What are you going to do? I've got a sister. Once more. 6:30. What are you going to do? I've got a sister living in St. John's Wood, and I think I'll ask her to give me dinner, then catch the last train down. I'm sure she would be happy to see you both as well. Maxim paused and looked at me. It's very kind of you, he said, but I think not. I must ring up Frank and one thing and another. I think we'll have a quiet meal somewhere and start off again afterwards. We'll spend the night at a hotel on the way down. Of course, said Colonel Julian. I quite understand. When we came to his sister's house, Maxim said, it's impossible to thank you for all you've done today. You know what I feel. My dear man, I've been only too glad. You must put the whole thing behind you now. I'm pretty sure you won't have any more trouble from Fabel. If you do, I shall know how to deal with him. He got out of the car, collecting his coat and his map. I should get away for a bit. I should get away for a bit. Sorry. He got out of the car, collecting his coat and his map. I should get away for a bit. Take a short holiday. Go abroad, perhaps. He cleared his throat. It is just possible that certain little difficulties might come up from one or two people in the area. One never knows what Tab has been saying, and so on. You know the old saying, out of sight, out of mind. Out of mind. If people are not there to be talked about, the talk dies. It's the way of the world. So he suggests Mr. de Winter and his wife, his young wife, to go away and so that people forget about them. He stood for a moment, counting his things. I've got everything, I think. Coat, cap, stick, map. All complete. Well, goodbye, both of you. Don't get overtired. It's been a long day. He turned in the gate and walked up the steps. We drove away down the road and turned the corner. I leaned back in my seat and closed my eyes. Now that we were alone again and the anxiety was over, the feeling was one of almost unbearable relief. When Maxim stopped, I opened my eyes. We were opposite a little restaurant in a narrow street in Soho. You're tired, empty and tired and fit for nothing. You'll be better when you've had something to eat. So shall I. We'll go in here and order dinner right away. I can telephone Frank too. We got out of the car. There was no one in the restaurant. It was dark and cool. We went to a table in the corner. Father was right about wanting a drink, said Maxim. I want one too. And so do you. My drink was soft, warming, strangely comforting. When we've had dinner, we'll drive very slowly and quietly. It will be cool, too, in the evening. We'll find somewhere on the road to stay the night. Then we can go on to Manderley in the morning. Yes, I said. Maxim's eyes looked large, and they were ringed with shadows. They looked very dark against his white face. How much of the truth do you think Julian guessed? I watched him over my glass, but said nothing. He knew, said Maxim slowly. Of course he knew. If he did, he'll never say anything. No. If he did, he'll never say anything. No, said Maxim. He ordered another drink. So it seems like Colonel Julian protected Maxim. We sat silent and peaceful in our dark corner. I believe that Rebecca lied to me on purpose. She wanted me to kill her. She planned the whole thing. That's why she laughed. That's why she stood there laughing when she died. I went on with my drink. It was all over, all settled. It did not matter anymore. There was no need for Maxim to look white and troubled. It was our last joke, the best of them all, and I'm not sure she hasn't won even now. What do you mean? How can she have won? I don't know, he said. I don't know. He finished his second drink, then got up. I'm going to telephone Frank, he said. I sat there in my corner, and soon the waiter brought me my fish. It was hot and very good. I had another drink too. I smiled at the waiter and asked for some more bread in French, for no reason. It was quiet and friendly in the restaurant. Maxim and I were together. Everything was over. Soon Maxim came back again. Well, I said, how was Frank? Frank was all right. Something rather strange, though, Maxim said slowly. He thinks that Mrs. Danvers has gone. It seems she had been packing up all day, and a man from the station came for her things. Frith told Frank about it, and Frank told Frith to ask Mrs. Danvers to come to see him at the office. He waited, but she never came. About 10 minutes before I rang up, Frith telephoned Frank again and said that there had been a long-distance telephone call for Mrs. Danvers at about 10 past 6. Soon after that, he found her room empty. She must have gone straight out of the house and through the woods. She never went past the gates. She escaped. Isn't it a good thing? I said. It saves us a lot of trouble. We would have had to send her away in any case. I believe she guessed too. There was a look on her face that night. I kept thinking of it, coming up in the car. I don't like it, said Maxim. I don't like it. She can't do anything. It was father who telephoned, of course. He must have told her about Baker. He would tell her what Cornwall Julian said about threatening us. They won't dare to do it. I'm not thinking of that. What else can they do? We've got to do as Cornwall Julian said. We've got to forget it. It's all over, dear. It's finished. Your fish will get cold. Eat it. It will do you good. You need something inside you. You're tired. I was using the words he had used to me. I felt better and stronger. It was I, now, who was taking care of him. Things were going to be different in the future. With Mrs. Danvers gone, I would learn how to run the house. People would come to stay, and I would not mind. There would be the interest of seeing to their rooms, arranging flowers and books, ordering the food. We would have children. Surely we would have children. Have you finished? Said Maxim suddenly. I don't think I want any more. Only coffee. Black, very strong, please. And the bill, he added. To the waiter. I wondered why we must go so soon. It was comfortable in the restaurant, and there was nothing to take us away. I liked sitting there with my head against the back of the chair, planning the future in a lazy, pleasant way. I could have gone on sitting there for a long while. Listen, said Maxim. Do you think we could sleep in the car if I wrapped you up and put you in the back? There is a cushion there, and my coat as well. I have a feeling I must get down tonight. We'll be there by 2:30. You'll be terribly tired. No, he shook his head. I shall be all right. I want to get home. Something's wrong. I know it is. His face was anxious, strange, as he began arranging things in the back of the car. What can be wrong? I said. It seems so strange to worry now, when everything's over. I can't understand you. He did not answer. He covered me with his coat. It was very comfortable, much better than I imagined. I settled the cushion under my head. Are you all right? Are you sure you don't mind? No, I said. smiling. I'm all right. Much better to do this and get home. We'll be at Manderley long before sunrise. He got in, and we started on our journey. I shut my eyes. The car moved slow. The car moved smoothly. 100 pictures came to my mind, mixed together in a senseless pattern. Ben smiling foolishly, Mrs. Danvers standing at the top of the stairs in her black dress, the postman who had pointed out the house to us today, Jasper chasing across the grass. I fell into a strange, broken sleep, waking now and then to the reality of my bed in the car and the sight of Maxim's back in front of me. There were the lights of passing cars on the road. There were villages with lights behind closed curtains. At last, I sat up and pushed the hair away from my face. I can't sleep, I said. It's no use. You've been sleeping, said Max. You've slept for hours. It's 2:15. We'll soon be in Kerrith. It was cold. I was trembling in the darkness of the car. I'll come beside you, I said. We'll be at Manderley by 3. I climbed over and sat beside him. I put my hand on his knee. You're cold, he said. Yes. The hills rose in front of us, disappeared and rose again. It was quite dark. The stars had gone. What time did you say it was? I asked. 2:20. It's funny. It looks almost as though day were breaking over there, beyond those hills. It can't be, though. It's too early. It's the wrong direction. You're looking west. I know, I said. It's funny, isn't it? He did not answer, and I went on watching the sky. It seemed to get lighter even as I looked, like the first red light of sunrise. Little by little, it spread across the sky. It's in the winter you see the north lights, isn't it? The northern lights, isn't it? I said. Not in the summer? That's not the northern light. That's not the northern lights, he said. That's Manderley. I looked at him and saw his face. I saw his eyes. Maxim, I said, what is it? He drove much faster. We came to the top of the hill. There, to the left of us, was the silver thread of the river, widening towards its mouth at Kerrith, 10 kilometers away. The road to Manderley lay ahead. There was no moon. The sky above our heads was inky black, but the sky on the horizon was not black at all. It was red, like blood. And the ashes blew towards us with the salt wind from the sea. And that's the end of this adaptation of Rebecca. So just to be sure that you understand what's happening at the end and with Manderley is that Manderley is burning. So someone set fire on Manderley. And we could suspect perhaps that's Mrs. Danvers, because as we know, she left in a hurry, very quickly. And almost like a thief, she went through. She left through the woods. She didn't left by the gates, as if she didn't want anyone to know that she had left. Very suspicious. Well, It's late now, and I'm going to leave you with this. And I hope that it raised your curiosity and that you would want to join the book club and read more and discuss literature and discuss Rebecca. I hope you've enjoyed this live reading. Thank you for watching or joining the live. Make sure you subscribe to the book club membership to the membership, sorry, to attend the second live workshop this Saturday. I wish you a beautiful end of the day, and I will see you on the 7th of October for a new series of live read along. And next month we will read North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. This is another classic of English literature, a true story, a true romantic and beautiful story. Not a true story, but a beautiful story with romance, a little bit of romance, but with so much social context around and many things happening in this novel. So I hope that you will be excited to read it with us. Bye. Bye bye.